Well, welcome to Inspired Caring, Kimberly Isherwood.
Yes. Thank you
Uh,
for having me.
yes, the author of Closure, The Lie We Tell Ourselves. And do you want to be called Kim or Kimberly?
Usually the only people that call me Kimberly consistently are my parents. And so I'm typically, or my brother Jeff, but no, I typically go by Kim. Just
Okay,
it
that's why
sounds
I paused.
you know, it's an author, it's a fancy author name.
Yes. Well, it's a beautiful name. And what a spectacular cover.
Thank you. I love it.
It's-
It's good.
Yes. Well, I would love for you to share with the audience a little bit about your background and what led you to create this piece of work.
Okay. Well, if we start at the beginning, I'm a
Start at the
very
beginning.
very that I was born in November. I am from Western Nebraska, from North Platte, so small town girl, just a regular old gal doing all the things that we do growing up in Nebraska. But I always have had some intuitive abilities, which I believe all children do and all people do. I'm not unique and special in any way, but um, I grew up sensing things, kind of feeling things, probably being what would be called a very sensitive child, or very, when
Mm.
someone's you're an old soul. I believe myself to be a very old soul. So I grew up in a family with my mom loving church, my dad not really being a fan. But I think a lot of just interesting occurrences happening through my life that um, all fell into place exactly like they should have for me to embrace feeling things, knowing things, sensing things, and being intuitive. So
Mm.
I went to nursing school and I worked as a nurse for many years. I was in the cardiology field, primarily in intensive care.
Mm.
I have a very strong science background, which makes me a hardcore skeptic to
Ah.
this day, which is almost kind of, like, can you be doing what you're doing and be skeptic? So it definitely was, one of the things that held me back. And I wouldn't say held me back, but always still guides me to this day.
Mhm.
Um, so I was a nurse, and then I lived in Colorado in the mid 80s, which at the time, going to Boulder was like kind of like a chunk of California had been pulled off the coast and then dropped in the
Mhm.
middle of the United States. And so I had really good meditation teachers, good yoga teachers, and that's where I sort of really embraced and started feeling far more in touch with my intuitive self. And I was also away from a bit of the conservative community that was around me. And so, they all played off of one another. And it felt like
Mhm.
things really started to flourish for me. I became more sensitive, knowing, feeling, sensing. And then I married a guy from my hometown and moved back to Nebraska. And that sort of was restrained in a different way because of the conservative community that I moved back into. And
Mhm.
so I've always been a person that gave my friends lots of good advice, and I could feel
Mhm.
things and felt them very deeply. But I was always really afraid to come right out and say it, because people are like, who are you? Are you crazy? What are you thinking? Oh.
Mhm.
Um, and so let's see, I think it was when my kids were finally like middle school, high school age. I did yoga teacher training, and then that's where I developed a really consistent, disciplined meditation practice. And that really has been the key for everything for me, was consistently meditating. And then once I could get quiet and really start, calming and settling, I started to hear, to sense, to know even more so than normal. And so um, then I started becoming that curious seeker. I've always been a seeker, and one, I want to know everything and I want to know all about everything all the time. Like,
Mhm.
no question is too much, too far. Like, if I have to go to Tibet to the top of the mountain, I'm in. Like, yes, I'm in. And so
Yeah.
I kept seeking and trying to find the right teacher or the right book or the right guide or the whatever it was. And they all seemed to fall in place for me as, as I think I was ready, or just developing my intuitive abilities. Things just came as I was ready for them. And
Mm.
so then let's see, I was a co-owner of a yoga studio, and one of the gals who was our Reiki practitioner at our office or at our studio And the story is in the book. She's very intuitive and very down to earth and very clear, and someone who just didn't beat around the bush. And so I asked her to, as I was working with all of this, I was always so afraid I was going to get it wrong, or maybe I was imagining things, or I was just coming up with things out of the blue. So
Mhm.
I met her and asked her, do you think I'm intuitive? What do you think I should do with this? And she was like, okay, let's do it right here, right now. Panera Bread, we're going. And I was scared to death because I was like, there are people buying pastries. What? Like, I can't
Am I going to
totally.
start levitating or glowing or
Yeah, like, no, you have to have the perfect setting and candles and a crystal, and we all have to be, in flowing attire and whatever.
right?
Um, and so she just really held my feet to the fire, which for me is exactly what I need. Like, I need somebody to do that to me. So anyway, I did my first reading with her. She was very stoic through the whole thing, not like, oh yes, and oh yes, it is, and like nothing. She was just a wall. And I was thinking, this is crazy. Why am I doing this? Anyway, we finished. She had taken notes through the whole thing. She said it's completely accurate. You're great. You do you. Do
Oh my
this.
gosh.
Know what you're afraid of. And so it was good, but also then like, well, now what do I do with it? And so
Right. Like you're climbing the mountain, you've sought the resources, you have the information, you're tapping in, you're like, okay, here I am. And now what?
right. Yeah. So her best advice was it will happen the way it's supposed to, hasn't everything already. Like all the teachers, all the opportunities, all the doors have opened. When you are ready, it'll work itself out. You don't have to do anything with it. And I think that's one of the things that I struggle with. And I know I just had a conversation with someone this morning is where everybody's always trying to monetize everything. And sometimes it has to have a business plan and a social media strategy, whatever with it. And sometimes it needs to just be like, it just needs to be. And so that's kind of the route I took, is like, whatever this is going to be, I'm going to let it. And so I started doing readings for my friends for free. I started just letting it be kind of playful and easy. And then eventually I got a business card and a website, which, like, holy moly, back
Super
in the day.
official.
No, I was outing myself as an intuitive medium. And then Facebook, of course, things take off. And my mom is has a very strong Christian faith. And the first time that she found out that I was doing readings or doing any kind of intuitive stuff was on Facebook. And so I had to call her and tell her. And it was like so scary. It was so funny because she was, you know, that's it's she's not against what I'm doing, but it's also in her Christian faith. There's a lot of doubt and things. So
Well, and
anywho,
it doesn't matter how old we are, like we still kind of want our parents to just give us the nod.
right. Yes, always. Yeah,
Yeah.
be on our team, be on our team. So
Right.
anyway, I started doing readings. I've been doing them for over a decade now. I have done readings, hypnosis, intuitive work, Reiki for thousands of people. And during the span of all of that work, I saw this very consistent pattern, which people come to me when they're sad, they're grieving, they're frustrated, or something is wrong. People don't come because they're feeling great. They come because something
Right.
is off, or they're in pain and they want to connect with a loved one who's passed, or they want guidance into something that's causing them distress now. A lot of people came to me and said, say it's a brother who passed in a car accident. I need to know this information because I never got closure. I never got to say goodbye. I never got closure.
Mm.
Um, and what I came to learn from grief and putting my hands on people and being with their energy and being with their grief is there is no such thing as closure. I think it's a mythical, magical concept, just like Zen or equanimity, or, it's a very abstract idea that pop psychology, that current psychology, that like societally, we have just adopted it. Like, oh, I just need closure. If I have this, I'll have closure. Hashtag
Right.
closure. Yeah.
Right. Right. Let me check this box so I can get on with the rest of my life.
Yes. And so I keep telling people over and over and over, there is no such thing as closure. Yeah, maybe it's been 20 years since you lost, your 2-year-old. It's okay to still be sad at times. It's okay. And people are so grief averse in our culture particularly, we're very tidy about it. We want to have, if someone dies on Tuesday, there needs to be a funeral by Saturday, the luncheon, da 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 da, we're done. And then
Mhm.
you're back to Monday. And that's just how it is. And our HR policies align with that. Our societal behaviors, all dictate that it's a very short, tidy thing. And grief is not. It's messy and complicated and ever changing. And, so I think I have just had this desire to give people permission to grieve in their own way, in their own time. And it doesn't always have to involve a death. It can be a breakup, a divorce. It can be a job situation. It can be an emotional trauma. It can be a natural disaster, as I wrote about in my book of
Mhm.
going through a flood. And it affects us. It affects our energy. It affects our storyline. It affects all of us in our own way. And people need permission to talk about it. So that's what led me to write the book. It was about a 10-year journey of talking myself into it. And then finally, we were at a retreat together, sitting at my dining room table, and our friend Leah Baez wrote A Star for Stella, and she had just published hers and said, "You can do it. You should just do it. Just do the program that I did." So I did. And here it is. It's birthed us out into the world. And I think it is, I'm really proud of it. I think it's good. It's definitely very representative of
Mhm.
of my belief truly that closure isn't real. We need to stop saying it. We need to get rid of it. It is not useful. It's not helping anyone. So
Right. That was what it landed so strongly with me, that closure is not a destination.
no.
That we had 7 people pass away in our family. And, maybe we need to talk about language too, because that language does matter. It's death, dying, died, passed away, lost. Like, we get very tangled up in the nuances of language as well. But we had 7 people die in our family in a very concentrated amount of time. And, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, the seventh one, I just am shocked and numbed. And I kept thinking, how am I going to get closure
Right.
when
Uh,
the wound is just cut back, pulled back open again?
yeah. Yeah, it is impossible. I mean, just like if you were cut open physically, there would be 6 to 8 weeks of healing. I mean, that's what if you had a surgery, that's what they would say, 6 to 8 weeks. And then
Mhm.
there's months of that after, and there would be a scar that's formed, and there would be something visible and tangible that had to knit back together that may or may not be as strong as it was originally.
Oh my
And
gosh, that is so powerful what you just said. And you alluded to that in the book. If we could all see the effects we have on one another, would we make decisions differently? Like, if we could see the scars that each other have,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
how
I think about, so there's a guy that I went to high school with that had, well, but he was older than me. But there was an incident one night that he was sliced across the face with a like the blade. And you can't look at him and not see that and not remember that. He forgets it's there. And he will tell you that. He's like, I don't even think about it until I see someone who hasn't seen me in a long time and they see that scar. And so I think the same is true for grief and feeling. We just can't see it on this. We would probably have the same physical reaction, like that, oh. We would maybe pull back a little bit or have some empathy and say, oh my gosh, I wonder what happened or how that happened. But with grief, it's on the inside. And we can be,
Mhm.
boiling mad, or we can be just, on the verge of tears. And no one knows. They can't see that until they pull out in front of you, or they say something to you, or someone looks you in the eyes and says, like, are you okay? Like, you are you all right? And then we just, we fall
Right.
apart. And so I've
Mhm.
had the luxury of working with thousands and thousands, well, not thousands and thousands, but a lot of people who say the same thing. I'm so afraid to say anything to anyone because I don't want to make them uncomfortable, or I don't want to bring everyone in the down, or I don't want to make other people sad, or they're sick of hearing about it. They're tired of hearing about my dead parents, and I think that that's just then why we keep our mouths closed. We don't say anything, and we're very positive. We're a keep turn that frown upside down kind of society. So
Right.
we
Right.
rally. Sally Sad Pants. We don't. And so we don't really allow a lot of time for people to do that.
Well, and you mentioned it in the book about really getting curious about what are our beliefs around grief and closure, and to question them, right? Where did they come from, and why do we have those trains of thought? I was working with a woman whose husband had passed away, and in our initial phone conversation, I think she mentioned it about 7 times that she is a widow, and I asked her when he passed away. Now, reflecting on that, it doesn't matter. Right. The reason, though, that we were working together was she was feeling stuck as a result of that time in their life when he died. And it had been 14 years. And she was very just daily continuing to live in that headspace. It's, daily reminders that he was gone. And she really wasn't necessarily seeking closure. She was just looking to get off the merry-go-round.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's why a lot of folks end up coming to me or some other intuitive person or whatever, because they want to have a conversation. They want to have like that last conversation, or have some sign that the direction they're heading is the right direction, or it's okay to love again, or it's okay to feel again. Like, some people just numb. They just numb out and they don't feel anything, and they don't want to feel anything because that's dangerous. It feels, like scary to feel, to love that much. And I always say, like, once you love someone, you can't unlove them. Whether like, some people have ex husbands or wives that pass, and then they have this weird sense of guilt and odd feelings about still grieving them, even though their marriage may have ended years before. And I would just say, well, you can't unlove them. I think love, it happens. It's an energetic thing. It's a connection, and it continues on. And whether you like it or not, you loved that person, and so that has an energy and a force of itself. And grief is just that measure of still knowing that there was love there, that you got to experience that.
Right. And what's coming up for me are the people that are on this caregiving journey with someone, and the person is still physically alive, but there are pieces and parts of them that are no longer present. And, specifically with dementia, that exists all the time. And so this idea of, it's this weird territory to feel like you're grieving the loss of somebody who's still standing in front of you.
Absolutely.
And seeking this concept of closure, like, if I had just been able to kind of tidy up my old relationship with them, maybe I could step into this new relationship that we're having.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, so my grandmother, who, was the best, I just adored her so much. But I remember the first time she couldn't remember my name. I was the oldest granddaughter. And I had 2 older cousins. And so I was the first granddaughter. So I was a big deal. And I was the only granddaughter for a very long time. And we were very close. And we had gone to my brother's wedding. And she looked at me, and I could see it was more her fear, because she had gotten the diagnosis of dementia, but she couldn't remember my name. And it was like that sort of started this clock. And it started this sad clock she just said, like, I feel like there's cobwebs in there, and I can't get through it. It's sticky. It feels like cobwebs. I can't get my words out because of the cobwebs. And I started grieving her, that day, knowing that I was losing her. And it is a very, it's a weird place, because it's almost like the shell exists and the body exists, but the person that was them, their essence, their beauty, their, wisdom, all of those things tend to depart. And then we're stuck with this body that still continues to go on, and isn't maybe loving, or isn't kind, or isn't, doesn't recognize you. And that's just so hard.
It is so hard.
Yeah.
With my mother-in-law, what was very, I want to use the word interesting, but delighted is actually what's coming to mind, is when she was living with dementia and she was past the point of recognition with people. Not everybody was able to engage with her when she was in that space. So she was living in memory care. She really didn't know who anybody was at that point. And what I thought was so delightful and just beautiful was that once she transitioned to actually actively dying, like once she crossed that threshold into those final 3 days, everybody came. It gives me chills. It's almost as if like she had been restored while she was here. And so everybody came through to like see her to the other side. Like it was just so special because so many people had really struggled to engage with her at that phase.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was really beautiful.
If you look at, and from just purely from like a medical perspective, so being with someone, giving birth, bringing life into this earth, it is this most intimate and beautiful moment. And I would say that is exactly the equivalent of being with someone at their death. It
Mm,
is a beautiful, intimate moment. Um, so I always say, like, if you tell someone what is the thing, like those one of those exceptional moments in your life that you gave birth to your first child, or you accepted an award, or you climbed Everest, whatever it was for you that had this magnificent amount of energy and emotion. A death has that equivalent amount. So why don't we treat it the same in our
right.
society? We're supposed to diminish it and let that go away. And we would never say, like, you can only celebrate your child's birth and that feeling of that for 3 to 6 weeks. And then after that, you have some sort of mental health diagnosis, right? But if we do that with someone's grief, 3 to 6 weeks, maybe 3 months after that, you're probably depressed and you really need to get on something, right? I mean, we have this
Right.
really uneven way of gauging an emotional and an energetic experience that are very much equivalent.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking about the stories that you shared. Obviously, that Kate and Alex story is the one that jumped out so much to me, but you share stories of people who lost a child, a pregnancy, a sibling. And um, I felt so much reassurance through your book about kind of what's happening with them when they're no longer on this earthly plane. I think that was the language that you had used. And so that was the other thing for me that this book, I just found it so comforting, um, how you are able to articulate what is happening for people when they leave. And I think
Yeah.
it weaves in with, my mother-in-law feeling like, well, it felt like she was restored here and we were able to see her to the other side where she was clearly fully restored. But share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah. So in an intuitive session, a lot of times, people are looking to get answers or get information. And so when I sit down with something, information comes through. I never know what it's going to be. I never know exactly how it's going to come through. And a lot of times it can be very symbolic and odd and strange. And by the time we get done, we're like, oh my gosh, a chicken with blue cowboy hat on. That's so funny. And I don't know. So anyway, I try to just open myself up to what that person needs to hear in the moment and be sort of the conduit for that. And typically when people are hurting, it's because they feel like they didn't get to have a last conversation or they want to know more.
Mm,
They're always like, are they okay? Are they okay? And humans are in the not okay spot. We're
mm,
feeling experience, and where my belief and my experience has been that when the soul is released from this shell, this thing that we're walking around in for a bit, then where we are is so much better and easier, and it's just purely love. It's just this plane of love and energy, and not with the complications and limitations of being human. It's a much sweeter thing, and I think they're closer and more available and active in our lives than we realize, in the best ways, like in the best ways. And signs show up for people, and a lot of times people have gotten a lot of signs and a lot of information, they just question it, they doubt it. And then when I validate that or share that with them, then they're all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, like in the Kate and Alex story, the lamp kept going on and off in the cabin, and the father of this boy who had passed hadn't told anyone. And so when I said that, he was like, oh, wow, okay. And so since then, he has shared that happens. Like that's sort of their sign back and forth with each other. And his intuitive abilities, the father's, has expanded and grown just from our session together because we're all intuitive. I think everybody could be doing exactly what I'm doing. I don't think I'm unique or special in any way. I've just practiced it with it, I've nurtured it, and I've gotten comfortable with it. But we're all getting signs and information and all of those things from our loved ones on the other side. We just, I think we question it and we doubt it. And so we want to go to someone else for validation. But yeah, I think they're having a great time. They're living it. They're good. We're stuck with, like, oh, what's for dinner? Do I figure out what's for dinner again? Don't make me figure out what's for dinner. So
Oh, it's like the middle-aged woman mantra right now. Like I don't want to figure that out anymore.
I know it is just a burden. It is a burden that I do not, I don't
It-
like. I
yeah.
think a lot of times too, people get signs and they get information, and I tell people this a lot. Humans are three billboards. You can say, like, I want a sign, I need something very clear to show that I'm on the right path or that this person got my message. And then you can be driving down the street and it'll be a billboard that'll say, Michelle, here's your message. It's on this giant billboard. And as we're driving by and look at it, we're like, oh my God, I wonder who Michelle is. She is probably the coolest chick. Look, it's on a billboard. And then there's a second billboard that says, no, it's you. This
You're
was you. And then we'll say, I'm gonna need one more. Like, could you give me one more billboard, please, before we actually believe it? And so I always just say, like, when there's a sign, when you get that information, just be joyful and say thank you, and more will come. That's all you have to do.
I recently saw this thing on Instagram. The person referred to them as glimmers.
Hmm.
Just when the glimmers come, because your brain is searching for evidence of whatever it is you're trying to support or think about. So if what you're looking for is a sign that someone is around or here or okay, and keep your eyes open and look around because the glimmers are coming.
Yeah.
We had a male and female cardinal on Christmas morning
Oh,
at my house. And it was that moment in the room where it's my husband, his brother, our kids, and then my stepsister and her kids. And I was looking around like, where are the adults? Where are the grown-ups? Like, where are the parents? And I kid you not, male and female cardinal. I was like, wow. You ask and there it is.
yeah, those beautiful signs show up. I was doing a book signing a couple weeks ago over in Papillion, and I was talking the whole time, and this woman that I was chatting with was weeping, and she was like, "Look behind you." And on the wall was three big pictures of like there were photographs of cardinals, and she was like, "That's been a sign for me always," because I had said I feel like it's not your
Mhm.
mom, it's with your grandmother. Anyway, it was just one of those moments where I was like, "Oh, I didn't even notice these things. I saw the sandhill cranes in the other room, but I didn't
Yeah.
even notice them." So, yeah,
Yeah.
those signs show up. My grandma always leaves me coins because she was one of those women that would go to a garage sale and haggle people for, like, if it was for sale for $1, she was getting it for 50 cents. And then she would have a garage sale the next weekend and she would sell it for $1.50.
Oh my
And
gosh, an entrepreneur.
she was a hustler. Yeah, she was a hustler. So whenever I get a sign from her, I'm really struggling, or I'm like, oh, just, so I'll find a coin in the weirdest places, like inside a shoe or in a pot, like a plant,
Oh,
or inside of an envelope, just like strange places. And so I know that's her. Never a dollar bill. I wish she'd throw me some Andrew Jacksons or something, but no, it's a coin.
it's always a coin. That's
Yeah.
so funny. And
Mm.
so one of the things you mentioned in the book, because it's been some time since your grandmother passed away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
been 6 years now. So yeah.
Okay. Um, there was something that came to you during a reading and it didn't really come to fruition until 4 or 5 years later for somebody. And it really got me thinking about time and how time is kind of bendy. We get very attached to our calendars, our day planners, upcoming events, things like that. But really, the fabric of time, there's a little more fluidity, in my opinion, than what we realize. And I think that ties back in with grief and closure. And, the woman who it has been 14 years since her husband passed away and she's looking for something next. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts around time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we like things to be very linear and very, because it gives order, right? We can, we
Right.
are able to like Zoom meetings because time is very orderly and we like it to be very linear. But I think over time and with, all of the metaphysical and all of the studies, the quantum physics, and all those things that are being looked at right now, time is a loop. It's not a flat thing, or if anything, it's like an upward spiral. And
Mm,
I think anytime it's an uncomfortable feeling, we want it to be done fast. We want it to be quick. We want to bite the stick, take the pill, whatever it is, get that over with. If it's something, pleasurable, we want to be in it for a long time. And isn't that just the human brain? We're always pleasure seeking or moving away from pain. And so I think time for me, I like my friend who died by suicide last summer. I am still struggling with trying to put a time frame around that. And there's times when I feel like it was 15 minutes ago. And then there's times when I feel like, it's been 10 years. And so
right.
I don't, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of trying to put a time stamp on everything. And um, feelings cannot be dated and measured in time. Cannot. And every time we try to, it goes just completely, out the window. So yeah, I'm not a fan.
Well, and to think with grief, there really is no metric or measure to know when you are done. It's just part of who you are now, like the scar. And I think this is it the 7 stages of grief those were really designed around someone who has a cancer diagnosis. So
Mental
just
illness.
or terminal illness. Okay.
Yeah, it
So
was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, which has been widely disproven. And so a lot of studies and things have been since then, but she was and she was really, groundbreaking at the time, but to give stages of grief and that, there's different things that people go through. And then the last stage is acceptance. And I think acceptance has been rolled into closure. Everybody thinks acceptance and closure
mm,
are the same thing. And they're really, it's sort of apples to oranges. It's sort of that those phases of grief that someone goes through when they know they're dying and then they accept their death. And I think that's sort of like the birthplace of hospice and all of those, and now the realm of death doulas and, really embracing your death versus back then, all those years ago, it was, I think almost seen as a failure.
mm,
I'm going to save you. You're going to get through this. You're going to fight. And then she really brought about a language of sort of working with the stages and the feelings and the emotions that you have when you're dying. But we sort of just then morph that into, okay, well, acceptance is closure and they're all the same thing and da-da. And people will come to me and say, like, I don't know what phase of the grieving process I'm in right now, but it doesn't feel right. And I'm like, well, okay, I don't know that there is one. And so
mhm,
let's kind of let's just step back a little bit. And typically people don't want to feel uncomfortable. We don't like feeling uncomfortable. We don't like feeling sad in our misery, but we don't know how to be with it or to talk about it or to get it out. And so I think we need to be far more comfortable in conversations about grief. I think if sometimes you just need to throw a fit or break a plate or whatever, you create space for that and stop apologizing for grieving.
mhm. Well, and what I feel like we're doing so often is we are trading one super uncomfortable feeling for another super uncomfortable feeling, like the avoidance of diving into the grief or expressing it is causing us a discomfort.
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
I will tell you, it's very interesting. So my aunt, who is one of the chapters in the book, her husband died by suicide when their child was 3 days old. He was a Vietnam veteran, had terrible PTSD. And I wrote about it from my perspective because it was a very life-changing thing for me and had a lot of impact and influence on, my family, the way my family died, dealt with grief, a lot of things. And it was the 50th anniversary of his death this past year, which I didn't figure out until I was, going on ancestry.com to try and find information about him, primarily because my family doesn't talk about it, didn't talk about it,
mm,
didn't want to talk, terribly, miserably, didn't talk about it. So I was over at her house recently and we had the best conversation we've ever had about his death. And I was scared to death to talk to her about it because my whole family has said, like, don't bring it up because she gets too upset. Don't bring it up. And so I didn't want to be the one to, tip her over to an emotional breakdown. And so then after we finished our conversation, I said, how does it feel to say his name and to talk about him? And she's like, I'm actually really pissed off because none of you ever asked me about him. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And all these years, you all didn't want to talk about it. And I was like, wait, what? I thought you didn't want it. We weren't supposed to talk about it because no. And so everybody was just awkwardly and uncomfortably avoiding it and doing such a disservice to everyone involved. Yeah, it was bananas. So,
Oh my gosh, that gives me
like,
chills. I mean, I just recently learned about mokitas. Are you familiar with those?
yeah. Mhm.
So mokitas, Papua New Guinea villages' health is determined by the number of mokitas they have. Mokitas are the things that everybody knows, but nobody talks about. So you have a
Mhm.
high number of mokitas, and I believe I'm pronouncing that properly. Very unhealthy village because everybody's talking or not talking about things that everybody else knows. A low number of mokitas means a healthier village. So here for 50 years, she has been sitting with this grief, and nobody has wanted to talk about it because they felt like they were being respectful and walking on eggshells for her.
Yeah.
Oh
Yes,
my gosh.
absolutely. Crazy. I mean, I was just so flabbergasted by that. And then I was like, well, how did I not know this? But this was like ingrained, in conversation, in family behavior, all that since I was a kid. And so, because it was right before my 11th or 12th birthday, I think
Mhm.
11th birthday when it happened. And so, the majority of my life, this is what we have done. And yeah, it was so cathartic and so validating and so lovely to be able to just feel the freedom to talk about this and to ask questions. And yeah, there was a lot of tears. It was a hard, long afternoon together, but it was so lovely. And I feel so much better about it. Um, yeah,
Which
I think we all have secrets and we all have things. And if we just, like got them off of our chest, isn't that what holds people back? Is like, oh, if someone finds out the truth, or oh, if somebody finds this out, I'll know. And then I won't be able to succeed, or I won't, like there's just so much risk in that.
they'll think
Um,
differently of me or not respect me or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it almost brings us full circle to what you say in the book about your curiosity about being fueled about the rules of grief and the fallacy of closure, and how societal expectations of grief change and just concepts of closure. It's such a great book, Kim.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was a hard book to write. I cried a lot.
Yes.
But it was, it was a long time coming. And like I said,
Yeah.
I coming from a medical background and there's very structured rules and things, and psychology and medicine and all of that, this kind of goes against a lot of um, what's being, I don't want to say taught or told to people through counseling and different things right now. Um,
Mm.
I just think it's time for something fresh and new. So
Yeah.
somebody had to say it.
And you were the perfect person to do it. I really hope that people who pick this book up that they I hope their curiosity, I hope they're just coming open to receive the message, this important message that you have. And at the back of the book, you share strategies and techniques for people to actually tap into their own intuitive knowing. Can you share just a couple of those that jump off the top of your head for you right now?
So, like I said earlier, I believe everyone is intuitive. I think there are some people who, you walk into a room and you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach, like, oh, something's off, or oh, this just doesn't feel right. I think it's intuition, it's empathic connection, it's ability. Or, you think about someone and the phone rings and, it's that person. And so we're all experiencing intuitive nudges, glimmers, whatever you want to call it, all the time. I just am all
Mhm.
about celebrating them and making a really big deal about it, because
Yeah.
that's what you do with your kid when you're teaching them to be. I just potty trained 3-year olds. They're just now 3. And so you cheer every time, you cheer the wins. Same thing with working with your intuition. I think meditation is clearly, as I said, it was the number one thing for me. I think meditation is so important, but a lot of people think, well, I don't have an hour. I can't sit down and be still for 30 minutes. I think meditation can look like a lot of different things for different people, but it's about, I think a lot of times with prayer, we're asking. It's like, you're asking for a lot of things. With meditation, you're waiting to hear. You're just kind of listening for,
Mm.
giving space for. And so, like walking meditation, some people, if you can walk, I say take the earbuds out. You don't have to be listening to a podcast all the time unless it's Michelle Magner's Inspired Caring. Um,
I like how you think.
but I think if you can just find something to get quiet, Thich Nhat Hanh, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a Buddhist teacher. He was a monk, but he's who I learned the technique of walking meditation from. Is like with each time your foot touches the ground, it's a kiss from the earth. So it's a
Mm.
earth on the sole of your foot. And so, each one you take a breath and you're just there. And then the next, but you take I think painting, I think art is meditation. If you're struggling with, quieting your mind, use a guided meditation. And I always say like 30 seconds is probably up 1,000% from the day before. So it's a win. Like if you can just take 10 deep breaths and just shut up for a minute, like it's a win, and celebrate the win. But
Right.
until I learned to quiet myself, I couldn't hear those other voices and those other things trying to come through. And so that's sort of been the key for me. I also say, like, keep a magic journal, like write things down. If step back and see all of the little things that add up, like, oh my gosh, I wanted to get a new car, and then all of a sudden we got this refund back and it was the exact amount for this car. Like,
Mhm.
right, that the celebration. And so that's just sort of nurtures that and feeds that, and it's that affirmation. Or if you want to sit down and start writing, and then just say, like, is there anyone here, is there any angels or anything, and just start writing down what comes through. It's kind of a form of automatic writing. Do those things and just play with it. And you don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to put it on social media. You don't have to share it. Just let yourself get comfortable with it. And the more comfortable with it you become, the easier it becomes.
What's coming up for me when you share those strategies, it's like rewinding a movie. Like you see a movie play through to the end, and then you rewind the movie like The Sixth Sense or something, and
Yeah.
you see it from this slightly different angle, and then you can clearly see the threads coming through.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
or or a highlight reel, right? Of your life or a month or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. M. Night Shyamalan has to be intuitive. Like, there's just no way his movies all have this, very psychic, odd thinking stuff in them. But yeah, you see it from a different angle. I think I just always, and when people say intuitive and psychic and those kind of things, a lot of people will have an image that comes into your head of like a gypsy fortune teller, or
Mhm.
the neon sign that says psychic and the palm reader, whatever, and they don't take it seriously, or they think it's like it can't be right. It can't be right. Well, what if it can?
Mm.
And what can guide you? Like, I've had some mentors and some people do readings and things for me over the years that I thought, like, that was the kookiest, goofiest thing I've ever heard. And then 10 years later, I walk into the same building or hear the same thing, and I'm like, what?
Right.
What? No
Right.
way. This cannot be. And so, unless you really kind of keep track of things and all those magical happenings, you can feel like life gets hard or things get really, overwhelming and sad things happen. And I'm not immune to disasters or grief or, hard things myself. But I try to celebrate all those little magic moments as much as I can. And then how now having grandkids and seeing, life through their eyes and how they experience all these little moments, it's amazing. It's just, we have such a beautiful, beautiful world that we live in.
I love that. Well, that's a beautiful way for us to wrap up. I highly encourage people to go pick up Closure, The Lie We Tell Ourselves by Kimberly, also known as Kim Isherwood.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom and guidance with us. So grateful.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. You're just doing amazing work. So I celebrate
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.